2FX, Classic LC, 2SI, Classic 2, Quadra 700, Quadra 900, LC2, Quadra 950, LLVI, LLVX, Color Classic LC3, Centris 610, 650, Quadra 800, Quadra 840 AV, LC520, Color Classic 2, Quadra 605, 610, 650, LC550, 575, 630, Quadra 630. Those are just some of the model of computers that Apple released in the 1990s. When Steve came back to Apple at some event, he was talking about the state of Apple and how they just had way too many products.
When we got to the company a year ago, there were a lot of products. These were the product platforms, 15 product platforms, and a zillion variants of each one.
And he drew one of my favorite Apple diagrams ever, something like this. Now, for a long time, Apple stuck to this diagram for the most part. Now, to keep things easy for model names that most people watching this video would understand in Apple's history, I'm going to fast forward to the 2010 early-ish time, but still using this diagram. Now, I worked for Apple from 2012 to about 2015. If you came in and you positioned yourself as someone who wanted a laptop, but you were a regular consumer, you did not need this for professional needs, you were going to college, you're using this for your desk job where you do spreadsheets and stuff, then odds are I would start the conversation with a MacBook Air. If you came in and you had professional needs, we would look at the MacBook Pro. Same thing for desktops. If you were looking for a desktop, it'd either be a Mac Mini or an iMac of some kind. Now, if you were a pro, of course, there's the Mac Pro, the tower, but I'll be honest, didn't sell too many of those either. It was usually like a 27-inch iMac. And of course, in the later years, there's the iMac Pro. And we're not even talking mobiles, but you could actually create the same kind of diagram for mobile devices too. You have an iPhone 13 and 13 Pro, you have an iPad, an iPad Pro, you have AirPods, AirPods Pro. There's this trend of a consumer version and a pro version. And while yes, all of these different computers here had various specs, you could change the RAM, the processor, you had some customizing options to really fine tune it for what you needed, but more or less there was a clearer line in the sand of which computer that person should buy. Now let's fast forward to today's announcement. Apple announces the M2. Cool. Obviously no complaints there. The future progression of technology. One could argue that they should probably slow it down a bit. And I mean, they're still coming out with like M1 Pro Max and all this stuff. That's going to get old really quick if that happens every year, but that's a whole other conversation. But they did the thing that I've hated most. They kept the previous MacBook Air. And why did they do that? Because it is a lower cost option. We are on Apple's website here under the compare models feature, which is an awesome feature. And we are looking at the 2020 version of the MacBook Air, the freshly announced M2 MacBook Air, and the M2 13-inch MacBook Pro. Now for price, we're starting at $1,000, $1,200, and $1,300. Not a big difference. And then as we start to go through the quick look, we can see that they pretty much all have a 13-inch, but the new Air actually is a slightly bigger display. 8-core CPU across the board, but the newer models jump to a 10-core GPU. You can have up to 24 gigs on the new computers, up to 2 terabytes of storage anywhere. And the MacBook Pro has 2 extra hours of battery life, so a little bit bigger battery. And it also has the touch bar that so many people hate. I personally love. We get into the compute stuff. The new MacBook Air and new MacBook Pro, it is all the exact same. Get into memory options, exact same. Storage options, exact same. We get to the display, exact same, except for since the Air has a slightly different aspect ratio, larger display, it's got a few extra pixels, but same brightness, same color. You get to the camera, and the new MacBook Pro, the M2 2022 version, for some reason, did not get the HD upgrade to the FaceTime camera. And once you get to audio, it does look like the Pro has slightly more Pro speakers. Same way with the mic, same amount of ports, same other features. Personally, I would hate working at the Apple Store right now. There is not enough of a difference between these two computers to make any sort of sense to justifying having the two different really 3 different models. Of course, they're going to keep the 2020 version so that they can say that laptops start under $1,000. But I'm sorry, if you can afford a $1,200 MacBook Air, you can afford a $1,300 computer. Like, none of these price points are like closing the door or opening the door for someone else. And even if money is not the issue, if I go into an Apple store and I talk to someone and I say I do advanced video editing, Photoshop, and like all the things that like a pro would say, of course it would logically make sense to be like, oh, I should look at the MacBook Pros. But hold on, what if I do a lot of client Skype calls or something? Well, maybe I want the better built-in webcam. Or maybe I want this slightly larger display. Like, the only difference that you're really paying for in the Pro is the touch bar and maybe the speakers. That makes no sense. Now, a lot of people would say, Michael, options are good. You should have as many options to your customers as humanly possible. But honestly, I think it just creates confusion. Like, if I had like $1,300 to $1,500 and I walked into an Apple store, I would have to spend at least an hour or two sitting there playing on the computers, doing the things that I would do, have an anxiety attack over like, am I gonna have buyer's remorse buying one over the other? Now, desktops right now I don't think are too bad. You have the iMac 24-inch, Mac Mini, a Mac Studio, and a Mac Pro. Now you may say, well, Michael, the Mac Mini and Mac Studio, those are kind of similarly looking devices, right? But there's a clear line in the sand. You're talking about a $700 computer compared to a $2,000. You have a vastly different level of compute power that you can upgrade it to. They're made for completely different people, and it is very clear that that is so. The new MacBook Air and the new MacBook Pro, it's a toss-up. And by the way, this isn't just an inconvenience or confusing mess to consumers. This also can cause a lot of tension, confusion, and just chaos internally in the actual company. If my memory serves me correct, in the Ashton Kutcher Steve Jobs movie, as well as backed by the Johnny Ive biography that I read, there are examples of this in the old Apple days. Back when there were so many different departments working on completely different machines, let's say a new processor came out, well, you'd have multiple departments wanting to put that new fancy processor in their computer, so then their computer would become the flagship, and then the departments would start like debating as to who would get certain features to put in which computer. So then you have these same companies' internal departments bickering and creating these devices that just kind of overlap in weird ways, but then seem distant in others. And so if you had a single unified vision that was very simple, then everyone can go all in on making that product and that computer the very best that it possibly can be, and just have everything in that. So here's my ultimate opinion. Apple Silicon is obviously incredible, and it is outperforming just all benchmarks, and it just can handle like a magical gift from the future, I don't know. But in my head, what that means is Apple should do what it technically does best, which is simplify and streamline its entire lineup. Maybe they should just have a laptop called MacBook, the Apple MacBook. You can either get it in a 13 or 16. If people really like the 14, fine, keep it 3 sizes, and then just update that whenever you come out with a new thing. This is the M2 MacBook, this is the M3 MacBook, this is the M16 MacBook. But the exact same story is happening in the iPad world. But the iPad and iPad Air, that shouldn't exist next to each other. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments below. Do you agree with me? Do you think I'm ridiculous? And who really cares? Just have a bunch of options. And make sure you're subscribed, because obviously iOS 16 was just announced. I'm currently trying to download it on all my devices and the new Mac. And I'm going to be doing something pretty special in the next day or two. So make sure you're subscribed. Thanks so much for watching, everybody. See you in the next video.